Hello, and welcome to the FinBiz 2030 Building Resilience podcast series. This episode features highlights from the Courage in Adversity webinar hosted by Lyle Malander and Mandy Mujnik. In this short episode, we hear from Kalm Paul-Christian FRSA and investment banker about his struggles with adversity and his ultimate triumph.
First, I'll start. During the first year of my A-levels, so I was preparing my grades to go to university. I'd recently come from quite a bad school, went into special measures after I'd left, and I went to a new grammar school. It was supposed to be top in the country and was supposed to be the most supportive educational environment. And halfway through my first year at the school, I was almost kicked out of the school. Not for anything to do with my behavior or anything like that. The reason I was almost kicked out was because my grade performance was starting to slip, but actually the formal letter come for me to be threatened to be removed from school came when I changed correspondence address. So the school I went to had a very strict catchment area policy, the distance you could live from the school. And my correspondence address changed, and they sent me a formal letter to say that they were thinking about removing me from the school. No one investigated with me why my correspondence address changed, why my grades were going down. I didn't speak to my form tutors, I didn't speak to an admissions officer or anyone. I just received a letter through the door. If they had investigated, which they later had to do, they found out that actually the reason that I had moved address is because the area where I grew up was quite heavily gang populated. And to cut a long story short, one day I came home from school and there were 3 bullet holes in my mother's car. And there was an intervention from the local police and the council, and I was eventually forced to relocate to a whole other borough, which was about an hour and a half away from the school I was traveling to. So naturally, my grades started to slip. I was temporarily relocated, living with my father, who lived closer to the school in the catchment area, until that family home was burnt down as well, and I was forced to relocate again to another location outside of the school's catchment area. So that caused a lot of disruption to my studies, and there wasn't a lot of support from the school. And I felt quite alone, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen with my education. Fast forward, I ended up resitting my exams, and I got an unconditional offer to study at Oxford University, and 3 years later I graduated from Oxford. Which brings me to the next challenge that I had. Whilst I was at Oxford, I had a lot of challenging experiences with tutors who didn't necessarily see my academic potential in the same way that I did. And in my last year of university, I had to write 5 exam papers that all accounted for my final grade. And at that same time, I found out that I was going to be a father. I now have a 4-year-old daughter. But at the time, it was very unexpected, and I panicked. So in addition to studying all day and all night for my exams, I started to study more days and more nights to start looking at applications, jobs, looking at something I could do in banking. Originally, I was going to be a history teacher, but I thought, I needed to make money for my family. Cut a long story short, again, eventually I did graduate from university with my 2-1. I did get an offer from Rothschild Investment Bank in the M&A team there, which was one of the most prestigious offers I could have got at that time. And I thought that all my problems were solved. And then I started at the investment bank, actually. And the first day of being on the job after training, I got the phone call to say that my daughter's mother was going into labor. So I had to leave the office there in the middle of a senior client meeting, and I went straight to the hospital to watch her give birth. And it was a very tough week. I remember they only gave me 5 days off for paternity leave, and when my daughter was 8 days old, I wasn't aware that as a junior banker, you're not supposed to have a life, you're not supposed to have a lunch break or anything. So I made the mistake of leaving the office for 15 minutes to travel to home, spent half an hour with my daughter and her mother. I didn't eat anything. 15 minutes to come back, and I came back to a really passive-aggressive post-it note on my monitor screen saying where was I dropped the ball, I should be doing things, and some really aggressive emails. And this kind of culture continued. So one point I just broke, and I was like, this isn't the environment for me. I'm not good at my job. I can't be a banker. I can't deal with these people. And eventually I quit. Now, 3 years later, I'm back in investment banking. I'm same seniority level I would have been if I'd never left. I've actually been identified as one of the future leaders of the investment bank. And I'm thriving in a role that I thought that I couldn't do. So what would be my 3 key takeaways from that? I would say the first thing is, didn't expect people to be committed to understanding your situation. Not to say that people or the world is against you, but who have natural privileges natural blind spots of privilege that look like, people are not necessarily going to be looking to understand everything that's going on behind the scenes for you. So you have to be prepared to speak and demand what you do. The second thing I learned that is in times of crisis, you have to be even more discerning about the decisions that you make, and you shouldn't make panic decisions. and it's quite relevant today. I wasn't ready to jump into banking. I grew up without finances. I grew up without the paternal role model that I thought that I needed. And I thought that was going to solve all my problems. I'd become a banker, be present with the family and buy everything they needed. What I needed at that time actually was a stable job, one that understood me, one that gave me space to find my feet with my family as well. And the last thing that I would say is that you have to learn to fail fast and fail quickly and just keep pivoting and learn from those experiences. Because despite the missteps that I made during those periods and despite the fact I can be reflective now and say maybe I shouldn't have done banking when I did, although I love it now and I'm thriving in it now.
To hear more podcasts or to find out more about FinBiz 2030, go to finbiz2030.com. Join the conversation using hashtag FinBiz2030. FinBiz 2030 is a joint initiative between One Young World and Chartered Accountants Worldwide. This podcast is produced by Big Top Multimedia. The original webinar series was produced by Be There Productions and Big Top Multimedia. Special thanks to Pexels.com.